we are going to move on to programming now. So actually writing JavaScript. So I would say for the next maybe hour or two, if you already know how to program in another language, this is going to be a lot of review for you because we're going to go over like very, very basic base level proficiencies with programming, like if statements and for loops and variables and things like that. But if you do not know how to program at all, this is exactly tailored to you. So it's going to be fun. So that's what I said. This is a tough section to teach because students vary very widely here. If you're coming from another language, this tends to be a little bit of review. If you're brand new, then this is going to be a whole lot to take in all at once. But yeah, I made a comparison here. Like this is if you know Spanish already, if you go to learn Italian, like you already have like 50 to 60% of the grammar already. You understand all of that. It's kind of the same thing here. If you're coming from Go, you're going to learn some new things, but a lot of it's going to be some review for you. So yeah, just kind of stick with me, skim, that kind of stuff. So I'm going to wax philosophical for a moment. What is code? Who am I? Why am I here? No, I'm just kidding. We're just going to ask you what is code. What is code? It might surprise you, but code is actually meant more for humans than it is for computers. And a lot of people are like, well, why am I writing code then? If code was just for computers, we'd all be writing assembly, like directly. So that's why we end up writing code, because code is something that we as humans can read and understand and update and maintain and these kind of things. And a very junior level mistake to make is to write code that you never intend on maintaining, because it's really easy to write code the first time, and it's really difficult to come back to code. So you actually don't want to optimize for writing code. You want to optimize for maintaining code. So everything that you can do to make your code more readable, more understandable, less clever, more like just more plain, right? So that you can go back and read it and say like, okay, this is exactly what this does. So you should write more code rather than less code if it makes it more readable. And a lot of people are like, I want to make the most clever, terse, crazy stuff. They basically want to write Haskell. Would be a funny joke if any of you knew functional programming. People that write Haskell are jerks. And that's also a joke. I quite like Haskell, but for me personally, it's hard to read, or it can be. So that's my plea to you: is try and write code that's very readable. Be thinking about, if I had to come back, 5 years later and try and read this code, understand what it does, how would I do? Like, you should be asking that yourself that constantly. So yeah, be deliberate, be explicit. Try not to be clever, and just remember that code is communication. So let's frame how code works then. So when you write code, the code is basically parsed into pieces that's broken down into something that a computer can understand. JavaScript is what we would call single-threaded. That means that only one thing is ever happening at a time. So if you're coming from something like Java or Go or something else, they have these things called features called concurrency, that they can do multiple things at once. JavaScript has no way of doing concurrency. It has doing things out of order, which is different from doing things concurrently. So that's good for you, because it's a lot easier to understand single-threaded code. It's really easy to understand like the order that things happen in. In general, so, going down to this code down here, let's maybe make this a tiny bit bigger. This is your first bit of JavaScript right here that we're going to talk about. Generally, it reads how you would expect it, that it does line 1, then line 2, then line 3, then line 4, right? It executes in order. So it's going to run this line, it's going to complete, then it's going to do line 2, and then line 3, and then line 4. So let's talk about this particular piece of code right here. We're saying const monthly rent equals 500. Now, even if you don't know coding before, I think this should make some sense to you, that monthly rent is a variable that is being assigned the value of 500. So if I come down here on the next line and say console.log monthly rent you might expect that I'm going to get 500. So this is monthly rent is basically now a symbol that represents 500. Now the const here means that this is an unchanging value, that I can't come in here on the next line and say monthly rent equals 600. It's going to say, hey, you already assigned monthly rents to be something else. You can't do that. That's what const means. We'll get into let later, but let allows you to change that, but const does not allow you to change that. Then we have console. Anytime that you see console.log here, that's basically going to say, I'm going to write a line down here in the result. That's all that means. So anything that gets put inside the parentheses here inside of console log is going to get written down here. Okay? Okay. In JavaScript, you can have as many empty lines as you want. So I could put 5 here, and JavaScript is happy to just skip as many empty lines as you want. So in other words, use empty lines as much as you need to separate things logically so that it's easy to kind of like skip around and see what's happening in your code. It's a useful device for breaking things up. Just like writing a paragraph in an essay. Okay, so now I have yearly rent here. And I'm saying yearly rent is being assigned monthly rent times, that's what this asterisk means. It means multiplied, because we don't write x. That doesn't make any sense. We use the star to represent multiplication, times 12, right? 12 months in a year, so 12 times the monthly rent is going to give you the yearly rent. And then I assign that to this, and then I log that out, and I get 6,000. Any questions about that? Is your first JavaScript program. And then you see down here undefined. So just the way that this particular little thing works, it's not that it's important to you to know. If I just put 500 here, it's whatever the last thing returns. We'll talk about returns later, but right now nothing is being returned, so it says, hey, you didn't return anything, so your return is undefined. So, or you could have just put literally yearly rent here. Yearly rent, and it would return 6,000 here as well. So, anyway. Oh, that's worth talking about. There can't be any spaces in variable names. So we need some way of doing like multiple words together. And if you put monthly rent like this, it's kind of hard to read, like all lowercase things shoved together, particularly when it starts getting really long. So we need some way of doing like separating of words. Now technically you could do underscore here. This is a valid JavaScript name, and this is more like how Python looks, for example. It's not how we do it in JavaScript. JavaScript, just because there's not really a good reason, but in JavaScript we have chosen to do what's called camel casing. So when you have words, you're going to do camel casing to make it just more readable for you. It's called camel casing because it looks like a hump, right? It's like in the middle of the word. There's nothing illegal about using other, like there's no reason that your JavaScript code would not execute. But as soon as I see someone do this, like in an interview or something like that, I was like, this person doesn't write a lot of JavaScript. Because everything is done camel casing in JavaScript. Oh, notice the semicolons. Remember in CSS that you have to put the semicolon at the end of every statement? The same is true of JavaScript. Technically, you can omit them. And it does still work. JavaScript has what's called ASI, automatic semicolon insertion. So it does technically let you do that. And there are people that choose to write their JavaScript that way. I don't care. I really don't. If I never have that conversation with someone ever again, I'm perfectly happy about that. I just hate arguing about stupid stuff, and this is definitely qualifies under stupid stuff. So do whatever you want, just don't tell me about what you're doing. In any case, if you don't put the semicolons there, the computer will put them there for you when it goes to execute them. Okay. Variables can be called almost anything. You can't use what are called keywords. So for example, I can't say const equals 5 because const is a keyword, right? It means something in JavaScript. So you cannot use const, you can't use function, you can't use a default. There's a bunch of things that you can't use. And believe me, it will tell you what you can't use. So it's going to say, hey, you're missing a variable name, or if I try and did like function, it's going to give me a weird thing. It's like, hey, you're missing a variable name. I expect you to, like, it's just not going to understand what you're trying to do because it thinks that you're trying to declare a function there. But other than that, if you're missing all the keywords, you can call it whatever you want. What else? Oh, just to show you. So I'll pull up these are my developer tools. When we're doing console.log here, and it's logging out to this little thing on the page for you, which is just a convenience. If you actually go into your console here, you'll see that it is actually logging out here as well. I think. Maybe it's not. Maybe it is. It might be blocking it. Anyway, normally, let's just trash all that. There's a bunch of stuff coming from the plugin that I'm using, so you can ignore that. Can I make this bigger? Oh, I can. Cool. Normally, you can actually just write directly here into your console and say, like, I don't know, console.log, 5 plus 5 or something like that. Huh. Oh, look, it's actually putting it out there. That's really funny. So don't do it on this page. Let's just open a new tab and do that. So console.log 5. There you go. So and it's logging it right there. So you can actually just use this kind of as what we'd call a REPL, R-E-P-L, read, evaluate, print. I don't know, now I'm making stuff up. It stands for something that I don't care what it stands for. But you can just like type commands in, mess around, test things out. I can say like x equals 5, 5 times 25, and like it'll just print that stuff out. So you can actually just program directly in here and mess around with stuff. I do it all the time. At any time that you would normally write like console.log inside of like your JavaScript file, this is where it gets written out, right? So, questions about that? Where am I? I'm in here. This site it happens to be a little screwed up because we overrode the console.log to write to this thing right here. Okay. I put a link here if you're having trouble finding your developer tools right there. That'll show you how to do it in multiple different browsers as well. So there's a link there if you need help. Okay, we're going to do it now inside of VS Code so you can see what that looks like so you can figure out kind of how to connect those things together. So just copy this bit of HTML right here. We already learned HTML. We're not going to spend too much time with that. Here, I'm just going to close this project. I'm going to say new folder on my desktop. This one's going to be called experiments. You can call it whatever you want. And then I'm going to open this folder. You can drag and drop it onto Visual Studio Code, and Visual Studio Code will open that folder inside of Visual Studio Code. You could also just do Command Open here as well and just find experiments and click on that as well. That would be fine. So in here, I'm going to put a new file. So I did Command N, Command S. So new file and then save, or you can also do new file. And then you can do save from here as well, from file. That works as well, and that should work both in Windows and in Mac, as well as probably in Linux, I assume. Okay, so new file, index.html, paste all that stuff. So we're going to bring in an experiments.js. So we're going to make another new file, and we're going to save that as well in experiments.js. So now we have a JavaScript file that we're going to be working with. You could ignore my ESLint stuff. No one cares. So this script tag is going to load that experiments file that we just put there. And now I'm going to copy and paste that code that we were just playing with right there and save that. So now this is my experiments.js file. And now I'm going to open this in my browser, just like I had done before. On my desktop, experiments, index.html. You'll get a blank page. Oh no, it says JavaScript experiments. But now if I look at my console, you'll see that 6,000 is being logged out here inside of my console. Yeah, this is yelling at me because I didn't put stuff in my head, but whatever. Screw you, Firefox, I don't care. Any questions about this? Is it working for most people? So I just wanted you to kind of like establish like, how do I start a new project if I'm going to write like a JavaScript project? So you need an index file to load your JavaScript file. And then you need to connect it using this source tag right here. So source equals experiments.js. Remember the / means in the same directory. It goes over to this directory file, and then it's going to download this file separately and then immediately run the code, right? So it's just going to start running this by itself. You don't have to do anything. You just say, as long as it downloads it, it's just going to run it. That's how it works.